for me.
Phantom of the Opera. It cannot be disputed. It is a classic. Unforgettable. But surely you were thinking, what the hell happens after those final bows? Well, I can tell you what doesn't happen. Love never dies.
Till I hear sing once more.
Despite the original's massive success, Phantom 2 immediately joined the ranks of Annie 2, Miss Hannigan's Revenge, and Bring Back Birdie in ruining everything that made the first one so beloved. As a viewer, I do see the appeal of the first Phantom and some of Andrew Lloyd Webber's other stuff, but mostly I find Phantom of the Opera to be largely a lot of spectacle, and for every, song that I actually do enjoy, there's like 5 or 6 that I want to put in earplugs. There are also those plagiarism allegations that like half of the music was stolen from other songs. Like the main Phantom of the Opera, like dun 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 dun, is from Pink Floyd's song Echoes. Are you gonna... There are some other examples as well. Outside of the actual production, audiences really took issue with Andrew Lloyd Webber basically just making up a sequel to this classic novel and established story, and really just seemingly winging it. People saw it as not only disrespectful to the first musical that he wrote, but even more so to the original novel that he had based his show on. So what was this plot that he made up that caused such an uproar? Well, we jump forward into the future, 10 years after the events of The Phantom of the Opera Episode 1. The first show takes place in 1881, so naturally, jumping forward 10 years would be 1891, right? No, shut up. It's 1907 now. The Phantom has ditched the underground of Paris for a new little spot on Coney Island in New York City. I would not have pegged the Phantom... I would not have seen the Phantom as like a corn dog queen.
It's delicious.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
And there are some interesting visuals with like this Tim Burton kind of esque carnival cast, but they don't really do anything in the show or take any part in the main plot. So it's really just an odd choice of backdrop for his soap opera. Anyway, Mr. Phantom is running a sideshow, and Christine, in these years after Phantom, has become this world-renowned singer. He sends her, I don't know if it's an anonymous letter or just with someone else's name on it, but he says, like, please come to New York. I want to present your premiere as a singer here. Come on down. I don't even know if he knows that she's married to Raoul and has a son, but Phantom don't care. Phantom don't give a fuck.
You need to leave!
But yes, Christine and Raoul got married after the Phantom events of the Phantom, and now they have a son named Gustave. So she's not suspicious about this invitation at all. She literally just picks up her family and heads to New York, and that's really when everything hits the fan, both for the characters and the production. They made the really odd choice of making Raoul a complete shell of his former self. He's like a borderline abusive, angry, suspected drunk. And now the Phantom swoops in and is like perfect daddy material, both for Christine and Gustave. And that just, people have spent literally decades loving this relationship of Christine and Raoul that end up together, and then they're just like, no, actually he sucks. Like, I guess Raoul was love bombing her in the first one, and now he's tired. If he's been treating her like over in France or whatever. Who can blame her for taking up any offer to start a new life? It's just honestly a surprise that she would bring him along. Meg, who is like basically just Christine's friend in the first one, is also brought back, but she does literally nothing. There's no point in her existing at all. But are you ready for the epic twist? We learn that 10 years ago, the Phantom and Christine touched bathing suit areas together. And wouldn't you know it, Raoul is not a daddy at all, because Gustave is the Phantom's child. That's right. This has become the Young and the Restless Days of Our Lives, the musical. We are in daytime drama territory. So the Phantom and Raoul basically make a bet about Christine, and Gustave disappears, and then because we're in the US now, there are guns involved and people get shot. Even if all of this is a mess, surely the music delivers. Right? Right? Chicago critics described only a handful of the songs to be memorable at all, describing them as recitative and bombast, talk singing extremely loudly. So here's where it gets really redonkulous. Webber originally announced that Love Never Dies would open simultaneously in London, New York, and Shanghai in the fall of 2009. So that's like an epic endeavor. Lots of huge, successful productions end up playing several cities across the world, but they don't usually open them all at once. We had a lot of confidence going in, Mr. Webber. Only a few months later, this was adjusted so that it would only be opening in London before moving to Broadway in 2010 and opening after that in Shanghai. All three casts would be rehearsing simultaneously beginning in August in London, and it was announced that opening night would be October 26th. Very soon after that, they changed their plans for both New York and Shanghai, saying that instead of Broadway, it would first be opening in November in Toronto, and then a third production would open in February 2010 in Shanghai. Their plan was that after those two amazing successful runs, the Toronto production would then simply move to Broadway, and the Shanghai team would shift to Australia. In May 2009, the London opening was pushed back again to March 2010 so that Webber could do some reorchestrating on the score and work out some of the technical kinks with special effects. And apparently one version of the show had a robotic Christine, but I can find so little about it. So if you know about Canada, I'm from Canada. If you know about Cyborg Christine, please fill us in the comments. I need to know more about this. October of 2009 comes along, and none of the three announced original productions have opened. A new opening date for London was now announced for February 20th, 2010, and it would open on Broadway on November 11th, 2010, and Shanghai plans were just dropped completely at that point. Well, as February approached, Love Never Dies was actually set to open. And other than the first two previews being canceled for cast illness and some technical issues, it finally began previews on February 22nd and had an official opening on March 9th. And the critics were not very kind. Monster Complex called it a trash fire sequel. Others said it was more spectacle than substance. They panned the script, the choreography, the designs, everything. And soon, people started calling the show Paint Never Dries. One reviewer, who was a self-proclaimed fan of both Cats and Starlight Express, if you don't know, that's the show where people play trains.
Starlight Express.
On roller skates. So this person is clearly willing to accept pretty much whatever Andrew Lloyd Webber serves up. But they said that they felt like Love Never Dies basically just shouted, "I'm Phantom 2" from the rooftops. They even include some bits of music from the first one, and they felt like they were kind of using that as more of a crutch than offering anything fresh and exciting. And only serve as a reminder to the audience that they liked the first one better. A lot of people were just baffled by the lack of logic in the plot and the infuriating and and inconsistent character changes. Like, how did we get here from the end of Phantom? There was essentially this sense of disrespect for the original story and characters that made many people just unwilling to give the show a chance. Period. So Love Never Dies became the worst thing a sequel can be. It didn't please the diehard fans of the original, but it also was not very accessible for new audiences. After they got just annihilated by critics and kind of struggled to sell tickets, Andrew Lloyd Webber actually made the unprecedented move of shutting the show down so that they could introduce new choreography, new music, lyrical changes, and kind of a slight overhaul of the production, really. And after that, they had a reopening night with critics invited again. And, feedback was a little bit better. Critics said that some of the lyrics were less clunky, and the updated choreography added some zest. But said zest was still not enough, and the production closed on August 27th, 2011. And while running over a year may be a fantastic achievement for the average production, this one came from theatrical royalty and was meant to run alongside Phantom, which had been going for 30 years, with a dozen or more productions across the world. So at this point, they started making more plans to head to Australia. And Webber actually made the baffling announcement that Australia and Toronto would be completely different versions of the show, and whichever one was accepted better would then become the Broadway production. Well, then when they closed on the West End unceremoniously, the plans for the Broadway production were just shut down entirely, along with Toronto,
Oh my God.
along with Shanghai.
Oh my God.
Let's just say the chandelier really came crashing down on this one. I guess it was weighted down by their lofty expectations for themselves. Like, you have to assume that things would have gone better if they just didn't try to do so much at once. Like, just start with a production in one city and go from there. Webber himself partially blamed his own illness at the time in an interview with BBC, saying that he couldn't give the show the focus that it needed. And now that I think about it, that's really similar to a quote that Elton John recently gave about Devil Wears Prada. Upon closing in London, Webber announced that now productions would open in China and Canada the following year. Neither of those ever happened. But then, something did happen that nobody saw coming. Love Never Dies was reworked even more and opened in Melbourne, Australia on May 21st, 2011, to huge success. BBC reported way more positive reviews, and apparently there were sold-out houses. Andrew Lloyd Webber actually said he considered this the definitive version. He didn't really see himself working on it anymore, and they ended up having a professionally filmed version that went to limited theaters and was available on DVD and Blu-ray, which was really tied to the anniversary of Phantom. I'm really not sure if the filmed version of Phantom wasn't happening at the same time. I don't know if the Love Never Dies one would have been a thing. I think that was really kind of one of their last-ditch efforts of milking something that was really just a sinking ship. The Australian production was announced to be running through 2011 in Melbourne before transferring to Sydney in the first half of 2012 and then Brisbane for the second half of 2012. But for some reason, even with the much better reception in Australia, Love Never Dies still ran out of steam, and the final few months of the run in Melbourne saw half-empty theaters, even with heavily discounted seats. The production closed in Melbourne in December and opened again in Sydney on January 12th, 2012. But for some reason, reviews here were much more mixed, and they could not sell the tickets or even give them away. The production shuttered in less than 3 months, and Brisbane joined the growing list of other cities announced that would never come to fruition. And so even with the initial success in Melbourne, the overall Australian production lost millions of dollars. So we jump a few years ahead to the fall of 2015, and a big splashy new production of Love Never Dies is announced for Hamburg, Germany. And this would be based on the Australian staging. And I gotta say, they really recreated the Australian version perfectly. And by that, I mean they couldn't sell any tickets and they shut that shit down early. One person posted online that their ticket had a value of $180 and it was offered for $18. 90% off. And they still couldn't fill the theater. Oddly enough, about a month before the Germany production closed unceremoniously, the man who was playing the Phantom left without any prior announcement to join the cast of The Phantom of the Opera in its first ever French language version being presented in Paris. Another coincidence is that Sierra Boggess was back as Christine for Phantom in Paris, and of course she originated Christine in Love Never Dies. And apparently, the curse did follow them there. A fire broke out at the theater only a few days before the 30th anniversary production of Phantom was going to open, and the show was delayed indefinitely. The theater ended up having to close for the rest of that year and several months of the next year, and they finally reopened in 2017, not with the special production of Phantom, but with Grease. They never officially canceled it, but it just never, ever happened. And of course, now we're almost 10 years on. So I think it's safe to say the production is not happening. And not only did the production not happen in Paris, but the curse seems to have spread from there. The long-running productions of Phantom on the West End and Broadway were both eventually shuttered, along with Phantom, the Las Vegas Spectacular, which was a version of the show that cut things down to about 90 minutes and kind of leaned into the theme park aspects of it with the chandelier and such. And I guess they also added elements of the 2004 movie, which I just can't see anything good that would have been brought from that. On the West End, the long-running show closed for several months and was replaced by a version that was essentially based on the touring version. They cut the orchestra literally in half. They simplified the staging and the sets and the costumes, and I guess it just overall looks and feels like a much cheaper production. Despite a lackluster response to the restaged version, it has been running again since 2021. And honestly, maybe a lot of productions have this much discord in the process, and maybe it's just that Mr. Andrew Lloyd Webber needs to keep his mouth shut, because literally after this, he announced that a world tour of Phantom would be launching at the end of that year. Well, it ended up being pushed to 2021, which ended up being pushed to 2022, which ended up being pushed to 2023, and then 2024. But hey, maybe this is your year, Andrew, and maybe you should stop announcing things before they're 100% certain. Just a thought.